Before I start, let me once again welcome you very warmly. Uh, I think, except for Nepal, the participant from Nepal, everybody else is an Indian. Did I miss anybody? I think so, right?
Yes, sir. So we do have one participant from Ghana and one person who's working in Qatar
Okay.
and one person from Bangladesh too.
Sorry, maybe I missed the introduction by the people from Ghana, Qatar, and Bangladesh.
They haven't introduced, sir. I think there are some internet connectivity with them too. They are not able to join.
None of the three have joined. Okay. Okay. So today, in the next half an hour, I'll be introducing palliative care, maybe a bit more than half an hour. Then we'll have a discussion and then it will be a case presentation. But we want to say what palliative care is. And I was planning to show you the picture of a family to introduce that. But as I went through the introductions, I heard Dr. Nehal Verghese. Nehal Verghese? Did I pronounce your name correctly, Nehal? And I think it was Nehal Verghese who said that he came into this course because the experience with his grandmother. Nehal, can you respond to me? Say hello.
Hello.
Nehal.
Yes, sir.
Where are you from?
So I'm actually from Trivandrum, sir, but currently I'm in Thrissur.
Nehal, you mentioned the experience with your grandmother.
Yes.
Sometimes the experience can be too painful for you to share. If it is not too painful, taking just 2 or 3 minutes, can you summarize? Nehal, the light behind your back is really blinding. Okay, that doesn't matter. Thank you. Thank you for turning a little to this side. Nehal, in taking just 2 or 3 minutes, would you like to summarize the experience of your grandmother?
Yes, sir. So I was very caught in this last year. I was not expecting to be here in Kerala for over a year now, and I'd actually spent majority of the time in Trivandrum and in Kollam. Kollam is where my granddad and my grandma are, and that is, I just happened to be there at that particular time. And my grandma, who she had a lot of comorbidities, uh, a lot of comorbidities. She was a known hypertensive. Previous three histories of cardiovascular accidents. She was a diabetic, and as age progresses, you slowly your body shows it, and she was showing it. And what actually had happened was, in September last year, we had just celebrated Onam, and she actually had a fall, and with that fall she had fractured her shaft of the humerus, and she had to be taken in for surgery. And post the surgery, the recovery in old people post any invasive surgery is difficult. It's something to be tackled. Uh, post the surgery, she was, I would say, bedridden. She was completely bedridden, and that is when there were. I realized that there were a lot of things that are different when you're taking care of a bedridden patient. You have to be, you have to look for bed sores, pressure sores. You have to. She had a catheter in place, and she had a lot of bedridden patient. Taking care of a bedridden patient is very, very different. And I was there at that time, and I had uh, seen a lot of things. You know, to take care of somebody, we had a home nurse, but to take care of somebody who was bedridden was not easy. And towards the she was deteriorating really fast. She used to complain of pain, but we couldn't come down to what was the cause of her. She used to complain of lower abdominal pain. We couldn't, I mean, she was not in a position to be taken to the hospital each time for investigation and all that. So we couldn't come to a diagnosis of what it actually was, but she slowly started deteriorating, and uh, uh, towards the end she had it was a newly diagnosed, we didn't know that her ejection fraction was low, and she was also in AFib, and she had a seizure one day, and post that she went into she went into like a coma, and she passed away like that. But more than anything, it was those, even though as a family, and I am her eldest grandchild from that side. Uh, it was, I think, me being a doctor, not being able to, do as much as I can to, or not knowing enough, or to be not be able to take care of her completely towards the end of uh, end of her stage. I think that it just brought about a lot of questions in my head, and like questions about how would it be if you're treating a family member versus somebody who is not a family member, and what you can do. And uh, it just brought about this curiousness in me on how, maybe palliative care, and end care can be, that's something that I needed to learn, something that I needed to be more aware of. I'm not sure when I can use it or how I can use it in the future as of yet, but it is something that I'm looking something that I'm looking forward to. So
Sorry, how do you pronounce your name?
Nihal, sir. Nihal.
Nihal. Nihal, where did you say you are working now in Kollam?
No, sir. I'm
Trichy.
currently
Trichy.
I'm currently not working, so I'm preparing for the postgraduate exam.
Okay. Nihal, thank you for summarizing the need for palliative care. Thank you for reciting your painful experience, thus highlighting the need. You and I went through medical school 3 generations apart. But at that time, I and now you did not learn how to take care of somebody in suffering. Your medical education and mine was concentrated on diagnosing the different kinds of murmurs, making a distinction between tubular and bronchial breathing, looking at imaging, looking at chemistry, and somehow nobody taught us to look at human beings. Your grandmother had several problems which you found you were incompetent to treat. Because I bet that, like in my time, for you also, there was no teaching on how to take care of the bedbound patient, caring for the skin, which nurses know. But neither nurses or we know how exactly to care for the bowels when somebody is bedbound. I wouldn't be very much surprised if your grandmother's lower abdominal pain was caused by chronic constipation over a long period of time. It's very common. And we are not taught to treat that kind of obstinate constipation. People die of constipation. That I learned only after coming into palliative care. In short, Nihal and everybody here, your training and my training taught us to diagnose and treat diseases, to some extent to prevent disease also. But nobody taught you or I how to take care of suffering. Is it our job to treat suffering that is associated with healthcare issues? What is the duty of care of a doctor? Anybody wants to respond to that? If I ask you to say what is the duty of care of a doctor in one sentence, what would you say?
To serve the humanity.
Great, Dr. Saravanan. Somebody coming from another country and wanting to serve humanity in this country. My respect for that. Indeed, yes. But how do you serve humanity? You can serve humanity by just sweeping the streets clean. Our streets are so filthy very often. You can serve humanity in a very many different ways. True. And I would respect anybody who feels that. But as a healthcare professional, how exactly you serve the humanity is likely to be more by treating health issues, because that's where somebody else can't come and do that. You have your expertise there. Kanjan?
So by being empathetic to patient,
Certainly empathy.
Like-
Empathy, thank you, Kanjan.
because
Yes. Because
even if we visit to a doctor, like we also want that person should understand the actual problem rather than only diagnosing and treating in a way that we are taught.
I'm so glad that Dr. Nihal, Dr. Saravanan and Kanchan. And if I go on asking, I think except for the, 51 people, the 15 or so totally introverts in the group, anybody else would be saying more or less the same language. The duty of care of a doctor is not defined by Indian law. Dr. Saravanan, where did you say you come from? Which country were you in?
I originated from India, but I worked in Canada for the last 10 years.
Canada. Okay. I'm not sure about Canada, but many countries, including UK, has the duty of care defined by law. Not in India. In India, a statutory body, that's the Indian Council of Medical Research, has defined the duty of care. I'm not very proud that till I was in my 60s, I never thought, what's my primary duty of care? Since this question came up in an ICMR guideline development meeting, the Indian Council of Medical Research, ladies and gentlemen, defines the duty of care as the duty of the healthcare provider is to relieve suffering. The duty of the healthcare provider is to relieve suffering. Nihal, your grandmother had her fracture treated. The bones were treated. What no one knew was how to treat your grandmother's suffering. And Nihal, in your home, when your grandmother was ill, was it only your grandmother who was in suffering? Why is Dr. Saravanan shaking his head?
I think it affects the whole family.
The whole family suffers, including Nihal. So palliative care is really treatment of suffering of the patient and family. But before I come to that, the Indian Council of Medical Research defines the duty of the healthcare provider as to mitigate suffering, to cure sometimes, to relieve often, and to comfort always. That is borrowed from the 14th century aphorism. to cure sometimes. Hey, doctors, to diagnose and treat, but you have 1/3 or less diseases that can be cured. In 2/3, you are not able to cure. Cure sometimes, relieve often, relieve her lower abdominal pain, relieve her cry for release from this world, which she might have told you, Niha. To relieve often and to comfort always. Kanchan mentioned the empathy. What is empathy, ladies and gentlemen? This is so very much different from sympathy. Sympathy is looking at the person and saying, yo, wow. That kind of thing. Oh, you poor thing. That's very irritating. That becomes part of the suffering. Empathy, on the other hand, is trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and try to understand the suffering. It is not fully realizing that we cannot fully be in that person's shoes. Not completely, but still we make an effort. Duty of the healthcare provider is to mitigate suffering. It is to cure sometimes, to relieve often, and to comfort always. There exists no exception to this rule. Not me. ICMR says that. There exists no exception to this rule. This is not a duty that you can morally escape from. And I have respect for the 50 people who have come here today because you felt the need to do something about it. Thank you very much, Nihal, for introducing palliative care to us. You have already done that. I am going to share a screen and to take that discussion a little further. Raju, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir. In the presentation mode, yes, sir.
You are a healthcare provider, right? Doctors? You are a healthcare professional. Health is physical, social, and mental well-being.
Yeah.
This is the official definition. World Health Organization. Physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The duty of the healthcare system was not only to fix Nihal's grandmother's bone, but to take care of her physical, mental, and social well-being. Dr. Saravanan, in Canada, I suspect that even if you have a fractured femur fixed in the age of in the 90s, the person would receive excellent pain relief and would be mobilized within 24 hours without giving her muscles time to waste. And the person would be rehabilitated and would be up and about. And next month, you would see the grandson or granddaughter wheeling this person or helping the person to walk through a supermarket doing the shopping. That is healthcare, physical, social, and mental well-being, not only fixing a bone or treating a microorganism or treating a biochemical abnormality or treating a tumor. Palliative care is just about healthcare in the context of suffering. Nihal's grandmother did not get pain relief. That happens to 98% of human beings in India. You and I were not taught pain management, at least the way it should be. Oh, we learned some pharmacology. We saw analgesic being used very often improperly. This is what you all have to change. A lot of people working over a quarter of a century could change things only for the 2%. But I believe we are on a steep part of the curve. And this is something that we have to change. 7 to 10 million Indian people are in suffering. This is not an official definition of palliative care. But if you ask me, what's the definition of palliative care? I would say this definition by Lancet Commission of 2017 I have given the reference there. Raju will be sharing this presentation with you. Please open that website. It is available. It's an open access article. The link that I have given there in the bottom. Please look at the 5-page executive summary. The whole article is too long. Okay, but 5 pages will be worth learning as you are beginning to learn more about palliative care. And the numbers you see, we are talking up to 1 crore of people in India now at this point of time in serious health-related suffering, and especially towards the end of life. Sorry, Nihal, to keep invoking your name and your grandmother's suffering again. But in India, an international study classes us among the worst 15 in the world. Our country was placed 67th among 80 countries studied as far as the quality of end-of-life care is concerned. Let me remind you, palliative care is not only about end-of-life. Interesting. I will be coming to that later, but now that we are on the subject, who wants to tell me when should palliative care start?
Sir, from the first day you meet the patient.
Who said that?
Sir, Dr. Harsha
Harsha?
from Malabar Cancer Care Society.
Harsha, thank you. If I am your patient, Harsha,
Sir,
if I am in suffering, if I am in significant suffering when I meet you the first time, yes,
yes.
the answer is correct. Absolutely. Palliative care should start when the suffering starts. Hey, wait a minute. Does that mean that the disease doesn't have to be treated, Harsha? Only palliative
sir.
care?
No, it's not that. Along with the treatment, you should always have a feeling that you should feel for the patient, and you should always understand their suffering rather than only treating the disease and treating the suffering. Is almost, it should go parallel, according to me.
Not only according to you yourself, Harsha. This is a global view. Now, palliative care should start when the suffering starts. And thank you for that heartfelt sentence.
Thank you, sir.
But ladies and gentlemen, one thing that we mentioned, that we do not treat suffering. But sorry, we actually worsen suffering. When I say we, I mean you and I as part of the healthcare system. We push 55 million Indian people below poverty line in 1 year. Some of them over the next few years will struggle back above the line. Many will never do. And for many, 2 generations more get destroyed by healthcare costs. This is not global. True. Globally, healthcare expenditure is worsening. But India and Bangladesh, doctor from Bangladesh, if you are here, India and Bangladesh are among the worst 12 countries, according to World Bank data, for the worst financial destruction by healthcare costs. So what, after all your, oh my God, how much of hard studies, entrance examination, 5 years and 55 examinations. Oh God, it has been a torture. And then another entrance examination and postgraduate studies. So much of torture. And at the end of it, we are contributing to human destruction also. We don't have to. No, I'm sorry. I'm only taking one side. That is not true. That's not correct. We actually relieve a lot of suffering by treating diseases, infectious diseases, many other curable illnesses. And even if not curable, don't we allow diabetics and hypertensives to live a near normal life? Certainly, healthcare system does do a lot of good, but we don't have to inflict this suffering. As Harsha said, palliative care is not only for the end of life, it should start when the suffering starts. The World Health Organization defines palliative care. I show some letters in red because the definition is too long. Quality of life. Nihal's mother's quality of life mattered. Even if she had a fracture, she should have enjoyed life to the best potential possible. I know that if I survive to the 90s, I cannot live the way I am living now, but within the constraints of aging, I still have a right to enjoy life. And when this definition uses the word life threatening, I would define life as not only just existence, as something meaningful, something with some enjoyment, something that involves contribution to the society, including your family. It's about quality of life, not only the patient, but also their family, as Dr. Sharavanan said earlier. And as Nihal expressed himself, it's about suffering of families also who are ordinarily rejected, neglected, bystander. We give them the term bystander. That's an Indian word. Dr. Sharavanan, did you ever hear the expression bystander in Canada?
Yeah, yeah. We hear
You
that.
use that word?
We use that word very often.
I see, okay. In many countries, that word doesn't exist. You talk about caregivers, you talk about families. So family suffering also needs to be taken care of. And prevention and relief of suffering is the key. And that suffering can be of pain or other physical problems like vomiting, constipation, nausea and vomiting, breathlessness, all have to be scientifically treated. Pain and other physical problems, psychological problems, depression, anxiety, guilt, fear. Very often, a few words of explanation will take many of those things away. Social issues, including the financial issues of relationship. When you are in constant pain, your character changes. The loving person becomes an irritable person, always snapping at others, inconsiderate to others. Relationships change. And especially in our country, the status of the woman being what it is, women have a very raw deal. We have a children's clinic where we look after children, palliative care for children, especially with major disabilities, birth defects, neurological problems, musculoskeletal problems, etc. And we sadly find in up to 20% of patients, the man of the house rejects the woman and the child. So all these are issues, and of course spiritual issues also. I do not necessarily mean issues related to religion only. It could also be issues related to meaning of life, like what's the point of me being alive? I wish I were dead. Nihal, did you ever hear that kind of feeling expressed by your grandmother? What's the
Uh,
point?
yes, sir.
Sorry to
Uh,
bring out your pain so much, Nihal.
no issues, sir. It's. I believe it's through experiences and through testimonies that that enrich a person's uh, the need. I mean, I don't know if I would be here attending this course if not for that. So definitely.
Nihal, what did your grandmother express in terms of meaning of life, wish to die?
So yes, sir. So towards the end, she would always be very negative because I think with respect to being bedridden, not being able to do things on your own, always being dependent on other people, and also with the pain which we couldn't treat effectively. She would always, she would speak very negatively. She would say, I'm going soon. I'm leaving this planet, this earth, very soon. And I could see the mental deterioration also that it had on her. Besides on her body, she also had the mental deterioration.
That is a very sad thing towards the end of life. And such issues, identification, early assessment, prevention, and relief. That's palliative care. So the only word in the WHO definition that I want you to give special attention to is do not define life only in terms of its length, also defined by its how rich it is, how meaningful it is. And WHO definition carries the footnote. Is applicable early in the course of illness. Hooray, Harsha! In conjunction with other therapies that are intended to prolong life. And it is not only for any particular diseases, it's for any serious health-related suffering, as mentioned by the Lancet Commission. Your facilitator, Sunil, has even treated a patient with pregnancy. Maybe that's another story and another time. But if there is serious health-related suffering, we will be there to improve quality of life. Just to say, what's the time like? How symptom controls becomes different in the context of incurable illness. Say if somebody is stopping the share for a minute. If somebody is in severe COPD, living with asthma and chronic bronchitis for ages, for decades, and elderly, never able to walk much, always panting, and sometimes when the bronchospasm comes on, that gets really bad. How do you treat this person? For most of them in our country, maybe in many countries, their life is mostly shuttling between ICU and home. ICU, home, ICU, home. For somebody with severe breathlessness, which is the rest of that person's lifetime, how suitable is the intensive care unit? Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you a difficult question? Can you ask you to imagine yourself to be that person? Somebody with severe COPD in the last few years of your life, always breathless. Do you want to live in an intensive care unit?
No, sir. Definitely no, sir.
Where would you want
No,
to
sir.
be? Sheila,
At
where
home,
would
family.
you want to be?
With my family.
Huh?
With my family.
With my family. sir. At
You
home.
would want with your family, Anuj. Yes. That is the basic essential. The one thing that is necessary for that person is something that is, there is no chapter in your textbook of medicine. The medicine of love. They need treatment with love. They need somebody to treat them with love. And that is specifically what is taken away from the care of the family. So when this person comes to me, whether it's advanced malignancy, no longer curable, or a COPD, if I am treating that person, this is actually what we practice. Sunil and I practice. We are not preaching anything that we don't practice. We'll certainly look for a correctable cause. That's the first thing. Hey, is there a pleural effusion? Tap it. Correct the correctable. Is there a tumor that can still respond to radiotherapy? Give it. But if not, what I will not do is to put them on a ventilator. I will not isolate them. I'm an anesthetist. I have been an intensivist for many years. I know that intensive care is very important in some situations, but not for the dying person. Period. Intensive care is not the suitable place for dying people. But even if not dying, this person with COPD should be with the family. I will give the person oxygen, but before giving it, I will tell them, let me put this oxygen on. The criterion is not the oxygen saturation. If in 10 minutes you are feeling better, we will continue the oxygen. If you are not feeling better in 10 minutes, we will take it away, because this mask staying there prevents communication. You can't even hear properly. And you feel hot inside the mask. More than that, who am I seeing in front of me? Somebody whose name I can read. Why are the names not being visible to me? What I would like is you, my doctor, to lay a hand on my hand. I mean, not in the COVID days, yes, by certainly keep the distance, but if not, if you can, giving me this touch which tells me that you care for me. Convey with your eyes that you care for me. Just speak 2 sentences. I see you are breathless. I am going to try my best to make you feel better. Ladies and gentlemen, these are magic words in medicine. If I feel that you care for me, I'll be so very much reassured when I am in your hospital. If you tell me, don't worry, it means nothing. Nobody stops worrying because somebody asks somebody not to worry. That's empty, meaningless word. Tell me you care for me, and I'll be reassured. You don't even have to say it. I can see it in your face and your eyes. I will tell this person, my colleagues and I are going to try our best to make you feel better. Try. I'm not saying that we will make you feel better. We are not gods. We'll try. More than the ventilator, what will really may help is corticosteroids, whether it's COPD or tumor. Tumor edema will be reduced. And I'll give you the American Thoracic Society's guidelines. What I learned as an absolute contraindication breathlessness today is the drug of choice in breathlessness. Low dose morphine. Maybe 2.5 milligram 6 hourly. I used to give 5 milligram 6 hourly, and Sunil told me to be more cautious. She showed me the literature, and I have also reduced the dose. 2.5 milligram 6 hourly. So what am I doing? I'm not going to do symptom by symptom. I'm just saying that when we treat problems, we will look for the quality of life and not at chemistry primarily, for which certainly you will need all this knowledge from textbooks that you will also learn from us, Sunil and team here. But you will need the skill, not only to give that touch, see how the doctor is reassuring that person, the touch which says, I care for you. But also the skill to do a ascites tap without pain, or a pleural tap without pain, or do any procedure. And also equally important is the heart, compassion, empathy. The head without compassion is horrible, but so is compassion without knowledge also. It is not as one is important and the other is unimportant. All these are equally important. And doctors, tomorrow when my time comes, this is what I hope you will give me: your head, your hands, and your heart. And this we have to get across to people where they are. Today, we are usually used to sitting in our healthcare palaces. We go out into the community. Care, like Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement does. Go out there, work with the community, empower the community, teach the family, empower the family to care for them. Nihal was a loving grandson. He's a loving grandson. He wanted to do the best for the grandmother. If only he were empowered in caring for her properly, he would have felt so much better, and the grandmother would have felt so much better. It's not only that. Do you know how frequently the family gets ill? Almost invariably, they neglect their own diabetes and hypertension, get into problems. It's about treating the family also, preventing and treating suffering of the family also. And remembering that the family includes children. You will be amazed at how many children drop out of school when there is a disease in the family. In Kerala, school education is free completely till 10th class. But still children drop out of school because in the month of May, they do not have the 700 rupees for a school bag, textbooks and notebooks and an umbrella. Umbrella for the monsoon. They drop out of school. Palliative. Our organization supports children's education. Doctor, I can't see your name. You are looking very worried about it. You are wondering whether you will be able to fund children's education. You don't have to. You just allow the community to do it. Sorry, I changed the slide accidentally. And when we do all this, we introduce palliative care. It has improved that people actually live longer. Palliative care doesn't shorten the lifespan, it actually lengthens it. We do this work in so many parts of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, and those who are outside of Trivandrum, please note that this course is not the end of our relationship. It's the beginning. You will have problems. We would like to continue to work with you, not only to help you with clinical management, but also with organizational things, even things related to getting your morphine license, getting the National Health Mission to support programs, everything. And remember, for those of you who are going to continue to work in another stream, sorry, there are so many anesthetists. One oncologist, I forget the name, Kottayam, from Caritas. So you don't have to give up your oncology or anesthesiology to practice palliative care.
What is the word? You have written cat introgermina.
You just incorporate palliative care as part of your work. In the sense, when you see every patient, once you have learned palliative care, if a patient is looking as if he is intensely worried, you will say, you look very worried. Is there something that you want to talk to me? And a lot of the floodgates will open and a lot of the real suffering will come out. The doctor from Caritas, the oncologist, what's the name?
Sir, Ranjit Thomas.
Dr. Ranjit, you already have a palliative care oncologist in your hospital like Manu.
Yes, sir, Manu, sir.
So what you do differently is as you assess the person for the particular stream of therapy that you want to give, which may be radiation therapy or hormone therapy, you will also start treating pain. You will start treating the breathlessness properly. You will start reassuring the family, and you will see why the family members are looking so worried. And you may find that your radiotherapy is going to be useless unless you find the funding for that from somewhere, because they don't have the money. They are already thinking of selling their home, and even then they may have to drop out of the radiotherapy halfway through. So that's palliative care approach. Generalist palliative care is what I give. I have done a few weeks course in palliative care. I'm a generalist. Sunil is a specialist palliative care doctor. He has a master's in palliative medicine. So whatever that is, we all have something to do. So I'll stop that because I have exceeded time already. I will. Raju, I see that it's already 4 o'clock. Shall I take five minutes from Amrita to take questions?
Yes, sir. So, anybody, if you want to ask any questions, you can ask now.
Questions or comments, Sunil?
Yeah.
Either by chat or oral.
You can unmute yourself and speak. Somebody can start, then others will follow you.
Dr. Shashikala Venugopal, are you able to talk now? I know you are traveling and cannot make yourself visible.
I just reached home, sir.
Okay,
Just give me 5 minutes. Yeah, I've been listening to you, but I just reached home.
I have a question to you, Dr. Shashikala, now. Can I ask you something? No, she wants a few minutes. So, okay, I cancel that question. What else did we have? We have a general medicine doctor. Doctor, when you are seeing any patient with pneumonia or any other ischemic heart disease, how would palliative care principles be applicable? Sunil, if anybody has any question, I will certainly answer that, because nobody was asking anything. I raised a question.
Okay.
Sir, can I ask?
Yes, yes. Who is this?
Sir, myself, Dr. Anuj Dubey. I'm from Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh.
Hi, Dr. Anuj. Madhya
sir.
Pradesh, I'm very happy, Anuj. Madhya Pradesh is a state with so little palliative care. Which place are you from?
Sir, I'm from Bhopal, capital of Madhya Pradesh.
Bhopal was where palliative care started very strongly in the 1990s and then died. So you had to rebuild it. Okay, Anuj, ask your question, please.
Sir, is there any criteria to start the palliative care? Like you said, first we have to ask the patient to say anything or to ask from us about his or her problems. So is there any typical criteria for it?
Doctor, the only criterion is that the patient should be in suffering. If the person is in suffering, we introduce palliative care along with the treatment of the disease. It's as simple as that. Whether that suffering is physical, like pain or breathlessness, or social, or psychological, or spiritual, you introduce palliative care along with that. So practically, most people with serious illnesses will be candidates for palliative care. Today, that doesn't happen much. But let me answer your question, Anuj, in another way. I'll tell you what it is not. It is certainly not only treatment of dying people. It is not only treatment of people with incurable illness. Anuj, I don't know if I have answered your question. I wish there was an easier answer. So there is one tool that the National Cancer Grid has developed by a working group in which Sunil is also part of, so am I. So as a criterion, when you see a patient, you can ask.
वो create कर देना उस पर. I'm fine, sir.
Dr. Hanifa, can you mute yourself, please?
Sorry.
Anuj, 4 questions. Do you have pain, breathlessness, or any other serious symptom? Are you in depression, anxiety, or any other significant emotional discomfort? Do you have a major issue in relation to finances or relationships? And the 4th instance, spiritual is not included in that questionnaire. They ask only the financial issue separate from this. So these 4 questions are asked. And if anything is significant on a 0 to 4 scale, 2 or more, then palliative care is to be introduced. Sunil, I have already
Okay,
exceeded
sir.
time by 6
Can you
minutes.
please repeat those 4 questions, sir?
1. Do you have pain? Hey, Sunil, shall we do that on another day? What will be the appropriate day? Anyway, am I doing introduction to pain, Raju?
Yes, sir. No.
On that day, Raju, please make a note of it and remind me to answer Anuja's question about the 4 questions for assessment of serious health-related suffering. And I'll also want to start with showing that video on that day. Okay.
You are not taking introduction to pain for this batch.
Okay.
Okay, there is one question. During this pandemic crisis, how can I introduce palliative care to a COVID patient? This is very inhumane way of end of life I have seen in my life.
Vasu, in May 2020, the World Health Organization, World Health Assembly, that's the decision-making body of the World Health Organization, passed a resolution saying that palliative care should be part of COVID treatment. We tried our best to get the government also in India to incorporate palliative care. But with COVID, everybody was busy. We couldn't get anybody to listen. But what we have done is to run a course. Raju, would it be correct to say that about 1,500 healthcare providers are done the COVID course now, Pali-COVID course?
Yes, sir.
And to Vasu Prakash and everybody, Raju, please send them the, what do you call it, the tool, Sunil? The Pali-COVID?
Pali-COVID resource tool.
Resource kit, resource tool. Okay. Please give the link to this group, and Vasu Prakash, that will answer your question, and maybe another day we will talk about it in more detail. I totally agree. What is being done is the most inhumane way. It doesn't have to be that. Do please look at the toolkit, and then we can talk more about it on another day. Vasu Prakash, please remind me when I do end of life care with you, this group. We will talk more about it. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I am glad you are all here. I am hopeful for the future. I am hopeful that when my time comes, one of you will give me humane healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
We will move on to a patient story. So usually after the faculty's presentation, there will be a patient story presentation by one of the participants. As this is the first day, today's patient story will be presented by one of the palliative care physicians from us. So Dr. Amrita, who is a palliative care physician working with me, who is my colleague, will be presenting the patient story today. So it's Amrita.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, all. Good evening. Yeah, let us move on to the patient story. So we have a 39-year-old male who was diagnosed with traumatic quadriparesis with stage 4 pressure sore presenting on the sacral region as well as the left gluteal region. So moving on to his presenting complaints, he had a constipation history of 2 days, and he had a pressure sore over the sacral region and gluteal region, and he had moderate pain over the hip region, and also urinary leakage was there. So regarding the history of his illness, he had a history of fall while carrying weight that was followed by neck pain and weakness of both limbs, and was diagnosed with traumatic quadriparesis in August 2015. He was admitted and got treatment from one of the government hospital and was discharged after 1 month. But after 6 months, he developed a pressure sore over the sacral and gluteal region that was stage 4. And regarding the history of the pain, he had pain over the hip and the wound site for more than 2 weeks. And the pain over the hip was intermittent burning type of pain that was scored as 5/10, and it was bilateral. And the wound site, the pain was continuous throbbing type of pain, and that scored 4/10. And his sleep was disturbed and he had decreased oral intake. So the examination, he was conscious, oriented. His temperature was 98 degree Fahrenheit and pulse was 82. Respiration was 20 breaths per minute. His BP was 120/70, and all the systems were within the normal limit. And regarding the pressure sore, it was a foul-smelling pressure sore that was irregular in shape. It had tunneling and exudates were there, and there was warmth and tenderness. So regarding the investigations, his hemoglobin was 10 gram, total count was 34,000, and his platelet was 1.6 lakhs per microliter of blood. So serum creatine was 0.9 milligram per deciliter. Sodium was 132 and potassium was 4 milligram per deciliter. So regarding the psychosocial aspects, so we have a 39-year-old unmarried man. He was living with a 65-year-old mother. They were living in a rented house, and he had only one sibling who was married and was living separately and was leading his own life, not caring or helping them. So he used to be a manual labor and was the breadwinner of the family. But now he is not able to do that, and his mother is working as a manual labor and taking care of him. The main source of income for the family is his mother's daily wages, her pension, and some help from some of his friends. They have taken rupees 1.5 lakhs from a private finance bank for treatment purpose. Being a Christian devotee, now he is not able to go to church, and he is very sad about that. He can only communicate over phone now, and he says to his mother, I don't think I can walk, so please don't spend money over my treatment. So the main concerns are pressure sore, pain, and financial issues. So to summarize, we have a 39-year-old man with traumatic quadriparesis with pressure sore present over the sacral and left gluteal region with stage 4 and with pain over the hip region. Now the discussion points would be, do we need to provide palliative care for this patient? What are the problems faced by this patient? What all can be done for this patient and mother? Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. Can you show the summary? So this is the summary of this patient. We have a 39-year-old man with traumatic quadriparesis, with pressure sore, pain, and many other problems. So do we need to provide palliative care for this patient? So that's the first point that we need to discuss. So I would like to get your opinion. Anybody can unmute and speak.
Definitely, he requires palliative care and definitive treatment also, because his pet sore has to be addressed. You heard me?
Okay, yes, sir. Anybody else? Yes, Dr. Saravanan.
Yeah, I think he needs palliative care. Apart from treating the bed sore, the other concerns we should keep it in mind is controlling of pain. And we need to have a strategy how to control the pain. And the other thing is the financial aspect. And counseling with the mother, like the family counseling also would help. That should be considered in the palliative care.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Saravanan. He goes one step further. So anybody else want to add any more points to what Dr. Ravindran and Dr. Saravanan told?
Patient's
Yes, because
mental
it's a
Sorry. Dr. Anjana, you can speak first and then. Yeah.
patient's mental health has also to be cared of, because the patient is tired of this bedridden. Patient is bedridden and he is actually mentally unfit. He's asking the mother to stop treatment because he is finding it of no use. So the mental aspect has also to be taken care of.
Yeah. Very true. So we have to explore his psychological status more, and then do what is possible. We have to find out whether he is in depression or something like that. Okay, Dr. Jorgen Jacob. No. Okay. Somebody else.
Yeah, can I speak?
Yes.
Sir, it's a case of it involves a lot of things, like it's a case of biopsychosocial concept of pain, because it also involves the social concept, the spiritual concept, the psychological concept, the financial concept of his family. So it's a combined thing which we can treat for the patient and his mother.
Yeah, absolutely true. So,
Sir, I would like to add something.
yes, Dr. Sheila.
Sir, since he's a young person and the thing would go in on his mind that I should take care of my family, and now I'm totally dependent on my mom. I mean, that's going to disturb him a lot. I mean,
yes,
because he feels that he should take care of him, but now it's reverse. I mean, mom is taking care of him, and he's totally dependent. So that also will really psychologically impact him a lot. And of course, the financial aspect and all everything.
Yeah, this is a real problem, because this person who is a 39-year-old man who is supposed to take care of the family, but now he is bedridden. His mother is working as a manual laborer. So that feeling itself is going to cause some psychological problem for the patient. And because of that, now the mother even would not be able to go for any job, because she has to look after her son. So financial problems is a real issue. So we understand that this patient needs palliative care. If you look at from a WHO point of definition, does this patient has a reduced quality of life? What do you think?
Yes, sir.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. His quality of life is not like the others. He's unable to walk or do the normal activities that the other people do. And he has a lot of psychological problems, financial problems that you have already told. And we also understand he has spiritual problems. He has all the dimensions of suffering. From the physical point of view, he has pressure sore, he has pain, he has infection. So he has physical problems in addition to the psychological problems, social and financial problems, and spiritual problems. So because of this domains of suffering, he has a reduced quality of life. So if you can reduce those domains of suffering, then we will be able to improve his quality of life. Okay. So actually, do we need to provide palliative care, and what are the problems? Actually, we have covered, but there are so many other points will also be there. You can add that, and what all can be done for this patient and his mother? That's another question. So, what you will be able to do for this patient and his family?
First thing is to take care of the pressure sores, proper dressing and pain relief. That itself will make his physical suffering less and probably improve his sleep.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Sasiala. Yeah. Anybody else?
We can involve the community to take care of the financial aspects.
Sir, also counseling.
Yeah. Yeah. Counseling.
We can involve the community.
Sir, also
to take care
family
of the
counseling.
Yeah. Family counseling. Okay.
He needn't continue to be a quadriplegic. We could even provide him help by a wheelchair, or there are so many quadriplegics in the world who are, able to successfully lead a meaningful life. So we could even tell him stories of such people who've been through the same pain and be able to live in that situation, to have a breakthrough even in this.
Yeah, very true.
I'm Dr. Anisha.
Dr. Anisha?
Yeah, actually, I'm working as an oncologist at Kollam. I think this is a scenario of many patients, especially who is having a stage 4 malignancy and all. I think we have to initially we have to give him the symptomatic support, then psychological support, especially sleep deprivation is a very important factor which the patient always complain. Then loss of appetite. Then usually we have to start them with antidepressants. Usually we do, because they will go through depression. And also financial supports, especially if we can provide with the medical companies and all, we try to provide them also. For that. And also we should make them aware of the situation also, not giving false hopes, because we can that's what I do, just giving them time to accept the reality also will give, that's my opinion, because in a denial phase it will create more issues to them usually.
So thank you, Dr. Anisha. Those were very important points, and I am particularly happy that you told don't give any false reassurance or false hope, because that is very important. Maybe because we want to take care of the suffering of everybody, so we will usually tend to tell the patient that, okay, no, there is no problem, you will be all right in the next 2 months, or after physiotherapy you are going to be okay. But we also know that it is not the fact, but we tend to speak like that, thinking that the patient will become maybe patient will be happy, but that happiness is short lasting. Maybe after 2 visits, this patient is again, if he planned to visit you, he will ask you, you told me that it is going to be okay, but now even after 2 months, there is no relief. And sometimes this patient may not come at all to you, because he will think that, okay, that doctor told me it will go be okay, but now I am deteriorating. So that point is very important. So we have to give realistic hope for the patients and families. And somebody talked about wheelchair. That's also very important, because we are providing as much independence as possible for the patient. Actually, if he's using a motorized wheelchair, he was provided with a motorized wheelchair, and he's able to go to church, and he's able to make connections with his friends. So we have to provide as much as independence as possible. That will also help him to live a better life. And I think another important factor is providing some vocational rehabilitation. So this patient, his upper limbs are stronger than lower limbs, and he is able to make some umbrellas and things like that, and he is able to earn something. So by earning by himself is also a part of dignity. So that's also making him happy. Another thing that we can do is there will be traumatic, many people with the traumatic paraplegia, as you told. Telling stories about them is, it's important. But if we have some people, if there is a group of these people, peer group, then it will be important for this patient to meet them and talk to them and find out how they are adjusting or how they are performing in their life and how productive they are in their life, so that this patient can also get a feel of that and he can take many things from them. So I think, yeah, Dr. Meera Prasad, do you want to? No. Okay. So anybody else want to add anything more?
Sir, just one thing, it's just my opinion, like after all these things, the community around him should also be made aware. Like the person, when he gets out, he should like, as you said, the peer group, those people, when you are associated with those people and you learn what all things from them, how we can improve the quality of life, and means according to them, how can they improve the quality, like that. When someone, if most of the people have that issue, like when they have some problem and when they face the society or the community around them, if they feel sorry, that if they feel that sympathy towards them, that will again deteriorate them, isn't it, sir?
Yeah, it's very good point. So nobody wants sympathy, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
So even when we have many patients who are paraplegics, so we consider them as a person, not as a patient. So that's very important. We have to aware the community about this is what they want. Actually, we even many of them don't want help from anybody while they are on a wheelchair. They will ask for help if they want. So these all are things that community need to be aware. That will definitely increase the self-respect of that patient.
Yes.
And somebody else told the importance of a community itself. So if the community, it is very important. If many people or some people around his family is interested with his care, they will come forward and they can actually do many things. All the psychological problems, social problems, financial and spiritual problems can be taken care of by the community. For the physical aspects, where we are the experts, the medical people are the expert, that only need to be taken care of the medical or medical professionals. The rest can be done by the community. So in palliative care, the community is very important. And actually, if we want to provide actual palliative care, we have to involve the community. So with their help, we can do many things. So that's what our experience is also. And I know that many places involve community so that the palliative care is very successful.
Thank you, sir.
How can we involve the community without having sympathy? Instead of sympathy, how can we create empathy in those community population? I just want to know.
Okay, so maybe I think these are discussions which can occur. Actually, sympathy is not a bad thing, but nobody wants sympathy because sympathy is because we want to help. So we know that sympathy is not the thing that none of us want. But when we understand that, okay, it is not sympathy, it's the empathy what we want, then actually we have to make aware of the community that it is not the sympathy, it's the empathy that what we want. So I think when we go to the community and train the people, so this is one thing which you can ask everybody, is that what you want? All of them will tell, no, it's not the sympathy that we want, it's the empathy that we want. So it's by educating the community, we can achieve that. Anybody else want to comment or add any points?
Sir, this is Dr. Raza here, sir, from Hyderabad.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so just wanted to, in the very challenging case, what you have presented, sir, and has a multi-dimension approach to this, and I think not so very easy, answers to what has been presented, sir. Very challenging, sir.
Okay. Okay. So this is how we have to approach the patient from the aspect of suffering. From Rajabal Sir's class, we understand that actually palliative care is providing love. And this love, how can we provide? By reducing these domains of suffering in the physical, psychological, social, financial, and spiritual domains. And palliative care is not only for the patient, but also for the family. So here we have to think of his mother also, because she's an elderly lady and she needs support. She also needs psychological support, and she might have physical problems. So we know that hypertension and diabetes is a very common problem in elderly. Then she will also have the other aspects of suffering, financial and spiritual, definitely. So we also need to look after her to reduce her suffering. Then only we can provide the real palliative care. So palliative care is not restricted to the patient, it is also for the family. We have to provide palliative care not at the end of life, but when you see a patient who has serious health-related suffering, then you have to provide palliative care from that moment. But definitely end-of-life care is also part of palliative care. And another important thing is palliative care does not end with death of the patient. It actually extends to the family even after the death of the patient as bereavement support. Bereavement support, it's actually providing an emotional support for the family to cope up with the loss of the loved one. But we understand that many palliative care units even go beyond that and provide many other supports for the family, like rehabilitation and many other supports. So these are some points that I would like to bring out from this session. So I think it's time to wind up the session. And I would request you